Sunil Kant Munjal, Chairman Hero, is with us. Great to have you on, Mr. Munjal. Thank you so much for joining us. Mr. Munjal, first give us your sense of, before we get into the budget and all of that, give us your sense, Mr. Munjal, of where we stand with the economy. What are you seeing which is kind of optimistic for you, and what is worrying you?
So on an average, the economy is looking very good. But as you know, averages hide more than they reveal. Some parts of the economy have moved up very, very smartly, and the recovery has been actually quite amazing. But there are still large parts which are suffering, lagging, and actually hurting right now, especially the high contact areas like theaters, sports, travel, tourism. And these are very large employers. Even in the manufacturing side of the economy, there are sectors still lagging, like textiles, like leather goods, etc. Within the automotive industry itself, which is one of the largest multipliers in any industry, if you see, there are two large multiplier industries. Manufacturing has automotive, and real estate, especially house construction, is the other one. At this moment, both of them are suffering, so they do need some ability to come out of this to overall figure out a way to grow. So I think the ability of the big banks to clean up the balance sheet is essential. Hopefully it will happen now with the bad bank coming into operation. The ability to provide funding to NBFCs to support the small industry and the informal sector is absolutely essential right now, because that's where the job creation will happen. The ability to clean up the entire process and systems for startups is very essential, because I believe that's going to be one of the big engines for growth for the nation going forward. To do this, at this moment, the government will still have to do some of the heavy lifting during this year. One, with the resources available. Two, by additionally creating new resources by more efficient revenue collection, by additional monetization or disinvestments, which does look challenging at this moment because the markets have started to get nervous, both in India and globally.
Right.
Also, to ensure we don't crowd out the borrowing ability of the private sector, the government does need to figure out a way to open borrowing from overseas, especially by making listing Indian bonds globally, etc., and making that easier. Raising funds from overseas to bring into India, I think, is an essential requirement,
right,
while ensuring sufficient additional support to both healthcare and education, and at the same time providing a Narega-like scheme for the urban areas, because there is a large section of the urban population which is still quite poor.
Okay. That's quite a wide canvas of points you made, but let me just take you up on some of them, Mr. Munjal. Now, you made an important point that while there are certain areas of the economy which are doing well, there are lots of other areas which are hurting, like you mentioned, hospitality, aviation, and so on. Now, what has been the shortfall, in your view, between what the government claims it has done to provide a kind of overall safety net in terms of, opening up liquidity and so on, versus the kind of actual support that's needed? Because often people have pointed to other countries where the stimulus package is much more direct. There's been actual cash out. Some small businesses have received direct financial lifelines, particularly in hospitality, tourism, restaurants, and so on, which hasn't happened here.
Yeah, that is correct. So two things. First, full marks to the government for coming in and providing what they did. They started late, though, by the way. If you remember, in the early days, there were repeat requests from industry and from economists and experts that government needs to pump in more liquidity into the system, and especially the direct support where it's required. That, I'm afraid, did not happen in the manner one would have liked to see. But to be fair, the overall system is looking so good that some of it kind of gets clouded over. Specifically, the issue you raised actually is a very critical one, to keep people employed, to support employers to pay the salary bills, even if they are partially somewhat reduced in some industries, so that people just don't get fired, because it's hard to find a new job in an economy which is suffering. Fortunately, as I said, in some of the sectors, we're starting to see a turnaround. So the focus, if it can remain on continuing to spend on infrastructure, would be extremely helpful for the economy right now.
Okay. And just last quick word from you. This is a point that I've been talking to my panelists since this morning about why we are seeing, despite what the government would claim, have been incentives to industry in terms of whether it's tax breaks or whether it's terms of, just easing liquidity, that there's not been enough capital investment. This is not something which is specific to the pandemic. This is, as you know, been a chronic problem now for several years. Why is that, and how can that be fixed?
So there are two aspects to it. And you're right, by the way, this is a very critical point you raised. One is gross capital formation has been dropping now for a few years. The pandemic just accelerated it, but it had been falling even before that. So I think that is directly linked to consumption. Because if you have a factory and your capacity utilization is only 50 or 60 or below 70%, you are unlikely to go and write a large check and create additional capacity. And that is what is happening right now. Many businesses and companies are starting to get to 70 or 70+% capacity utilization. In a recent survey that was done in CII, it showed that this is the first time after many, many months or many quarters that companies are now talking of capital expenditure plans, which is encouraging. But we are yet to see this come in large droves. It is some companies who have announced this and some sectors of the economy which have announced this. So I think it is important that we figure out a way maybe to expand the PLI scheme, bring investment allowance back for a period of maybe about 2 to 3 years to encourage people who are sitting on the fence, because there are some sitting on the fence, to start to invest. Because that's a virtuous cycle. Once you start, then you create more capacity, you create more jobs, you create more incomes, you create more consumption. So it is a wonderful virtuous cycle that we need to kickstart, and it is possible because we are at that point right now. We are, in a sense, almost at a tipping point.